Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, distinguished guests. My name is Adi Kantor, and I'm honored to open this session that deals with the subject that we all understand its importance and its direct impact on national security issues. Anti-Semitism as a global problem. This week, on January 27th, the entire world commemorated the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz extermination camp. About 50 leaders from all over the world came to Jerusalem as part of the International Holocaust Forum. All of them swore to combat the rise again of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism, ladies and gentlemen, is on the rise. 80 years after the outbreak of World War II and 75 years since the gas chambers have stopped operating, and once again, we see anti-Semitism on the rise, not just in marginal places, but in key political arenas, in the parliaments, in the streets, and of course, in the social media. In democratic societies today, we can see a growing political polarization that is accompanied by the strengthening of extremists from the right and the left, which is dominated by a very violent populist discourse, with the growing weakening of the traditional center parties and the creation of an ongoing political and social vacuum. We see new actors entering the political arena that are threatening to put in place an anti-liberal racist discourse which targets Jews as well. So, to talk about the return of anti-Semitism to center stage, its new characteristics, both latent and apparent, that are very well rooted in the discourse in the left, right, and center, I would like to discuss with two distinguished guests today who are constantly operating, each and every one of them in their own sector, in raising awareness and the analysis of this phenomena and the stubborn struggle against it. Now, I'd like to invite to the stage the researcher and laureate of the Israel Prize, Professor Yehuda Bauer. Yehuda Bauer, ladies and gentlemen. He's an Emeritus Professor for the History of the Holocaust in the Institute for Contemporary Judaism in the Hebrew University, and laureate of the Israel Prize for 1998 and the Emet Prize in 2017. He published 22 books dealing with the history of the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and genocide. Amongst his many activities over the years, he founded the Center for Research of Anti-Semitism in the Hebrew University, was the head of the Yad Vashem Research Institute, a member of the Israeli Academy of Sciences, and today he serves as an academic advisor to Yad Vashem. Our second guest today, I'm honored to invite to the stage Deputy Senior VP for International Affairs in the ADL, Dr. Sharon Nazarian. Dr. Nazarian is leading the struggle against anti-Semitism and racist hatred throughout the world, including Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East, and she supervises the ADL chapter in Israel. In addition, she is the president of the Yunus and Soraya Nazarian Center. She is the founder of the Yunus and Nazarian for the Israel Studies in UCLA. Now I will join you at the panel. Hello and welcome, Professor Bauer and Dr. Nazarian. I'd like to start with the first question before I give each of you 7 minutes to talk about it. And I'd like to start with a quote from the German president who spoke here in Jerusalem last week in the memorial ceremony in Yad Vashem. And this is what he said. He said, I wish I could say that our memory has made us immune to evil. I wish I could say that we, the Germans, learned from history once and for all. But I cannot say that when hatred is spreading. I cannot say that when only a thick wooden door prevents an anti-Semitic terrorist to bring to a bloodbath in a synagogue in Halle in Yom Kippur. The perpetrators are not the same, but the evil is the same evil. I would like Professor Bauer to address this question to you. We all remember what happened in the city of Halle this last Yom Kippur, when it was only indeed a thick wooden door that prevented that terrorist from slaughtering dozens of Jews praying on Yom Kippur. Professor Bauer, why is it happening now in Germany, in Europe? How do you explain this timing? Why now? I think that there are two main reasons. One is historic. Anti-Semitism and the hatred of Israel, this is something that dates back to pre-Christianic times, to the Hellenistic period. It changes forms, etc., but ultimately it's the same. It is the basis of anti-Semitism. Could somebody turn up his mic, please? Let's change your mic, please. Is this better? So the first reason is historic. Jewish culture is different, perhaps not better, maybe worse, but anyhow it's different than the cultures surrounding it. And this development has turned into something that Shula Volkov in the Tel Aviv University defined as a basic historic phenomena in the monotheistic cultures, or those that are called monotheistic, Christianity and Islam. This is something which is latent and constant within these societies or civilizations, and change can only be very slow. The second thing actually is not related to Jews. There is a drop in the birth rate throughout the northern world, China, Japan, Europe, Russia. The minimum in order to maintain a population is 2.1 children per woman. In all the developed societies, except for Israel, the average is 1.6, 1.7, sometimes even beneath that, for example, in Lithuania and Italy. So we are seeing an aging population, but in order to address that, to maintain a standard of living, they must take in immigration, but they don't want to take in immigrants, but they have no other choice. And then the immigrants come. If it's North America, they come from Latin America. If it's Europe, they come from Africa and the Middle East. And this is something that raises a nationalist backlash, a nationalist reaction that wishes to protect the culture, the language, the legacy, etc., of the existing society in each of these places. In order to maintain this nationalism, you need to get rid of those who don't belong to that nationality. And first and foremost, that element that has been constantly been part of these societies, these are the Jews. Therefore, there's a matter of proximity between anti-Semitism and racism in general. It's not that anti-Semitism is only part of racism. It's almost the opposite. But racism is definitely targets not just Jews, also people of skin color and LGTB, and Jews are definitely a very obvious target, an acceptable and regular target in these societies. And then there's this timing of the historic basis and the contemporary aspect. And when you look at Germany, the US, all these places where you see a rise in anti-Semitism, it seems as if it comes from different sources. Afro-Americans, very partially in the U.S., white supremacists in the U.S. and in other places, wherever you don't have Jews, where you never saw anti-Semitism in China, for example. It doesn't, surface there, but it surfaces in all the other places. So the way to address this is in no way to protect Jews. This focus on laws against anti-Semitism, it's nonsense. It's perhaps it could help somehow here and there. It's nice to have. Law does not exempt a society from ideological and social developments, and therefore we need to use different measures, not just the law. Laws are nice,
but the way is to attack the anti-Semitic themselves. They're the ones who are going to get they're the ones who speak to the non-Jewish population. That's the issue. Thank you, Professor. We're going to get to the details in just a moment when we talk about fighting this phenomena. But I want to now turn to Dr. Nazarian. Hello to you. Anti-Semitism against the Jewish population of the U.S. is now at a historical peak in 2018. That's your report, right, that you published. So this is the number of anti-Semitic attacks has doubled, meaning, and with one taking, I think, the greatest number of creating the greatest number of Jewish fatalities. So what do you think has happened in the U.S. in the last few years, in the last period of time that has caused what we see here?
Sharon, yes, I have to apologize. I'll be speaking in English, so for the next year, my Hebrew will be good enough to speak in Hebrew. First of all, I want to really commend INSS for having this panel. I think it's a first. I think it represents the importance this topic needs, the attention it needs. And secondly, I really want to say how honored I am to be on the same panel with Professor Bauer. For me, this has been a professional real honor to be here with you. So this is a topic that we're very happy to see in forums like this, such as the INSS, being brought up, because it is the time to do that. As far as Halle, I just want to say 2 words about it. One of my team members, the member of ADL's International Affairs team, who lives in Berlin, happened to be in the synagogue that day, just by chance. She is a young leader. She was very involved in the student union movement of Germany and Europe. And the reason that they went to Halle, to that synagogue that day, was actually part of a good message, and maybe some things that we should celebrate in Germany specifically, which is the vibrancy of Jewish life, the regrowth and rebirth of Jewish life in Germany. That's why they went there. That's why those Jews went. It was a very small synagogue, it's a small community. They went to be with them for Yom Kippur and to really elevate the community and be together. The fact that the attack happened, and it was that synagogue where they had requested security, the mayor and the city had not responded to it, that is a symptom of the problem, and I think Professor Bauer has really, in a very eloquent way, talked about the overall issues. As far as the US is concerned, we just released 2 days ago our 2019 polling of anti-Semitic attitudes in the US. And I will share some of the data with you, but overall, the answer to your question is why US now? The results of the polling shows that, in fact, anti-Semitic attitudes have held pretty constant. Mm-hmm. We're not seeing a huge spike in anti-Semitic attitudes, and I'll share some of that with you. But the bottom line is that those who hold extreme anti-Semitic views feel emboldened today, and therefore act on it. So when we look at Pittsburgh, when we look at Poway, when we look at what happened in New York and New Jersey in the last few months of 2019, it is those extremists who have always been there, but today feel emboldened and empowered to act on their hate. And that's what's changed in America. So for American Jewry today, that sense of security that we've always had, I can tell you as Senior Vice President for International Affairs of an American Jewish organization, when I go around the world and I meet with Jewish communities, that is our #1 goal. My job is to go from community to community in Europe, in Latin America, in the Middle East. I come from a very small Jewish community. I was born in Iran. I know how it feels when those from stronger communities come and say, we're here to help you. We're here to support you. Well, I have to tell you now, that narrative has changed. I, as a representative of an American Jewish organization, can no longer go to the Brazilian Jewish community or the French Jewish community and say, we, the strong, the safe American Jews, are here to support you. It is now a narrative that says we are both facing threats and we both need to learn from one another. So it is a changed narrative. That sense of security that American Jews have always had the luxury of is now shaking a little bit. And we're all considering about how to keep our synagogue safe, how to keep our Jewish schools safe. These are questions that now we're facing, and we have to go to our brothers and sisters around the world and say, how do you keep your institutions safe? So it's a challenge, and I think American Jews have to now face that. I do want to just, if you don't mind, share some of the data which I think is interesting. So nearly 1 in 5 Americans, 19%, believe that Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust. Given that commemoration we all just held on the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, that's still a very high number. This is, shows that Americans are becoming less aware of the events on the Holocaust as time passes, and that's probably a global phenomenon as well. Jewish disloyalty is a widespread anti-Semitic stereotype still. 24% of Americans agree with the statement that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to America. Stereotypes about Jewish control of business and financial markets are among the most pernicious and enduring still in terms of anti-Semitic beliefs. 15% find Jews have too much power in the business world, and 10% agree with the statement that Jews are more willing than others to use shady practices to get what they want. So nearly 1/3 of respondents, 31%, say that Jewish employers go out of their way to hire other Jews, and 17% say that the movie and television industry in the city I'm from are basically Hollywood is run by Jews. So these classic anti-Semitic tropes are still there and very present. Historical myths about Jews are still very relevant. So 27% responded that they believe that Jews killed Christ. So this is some of the classic tropes that the professor referred to. Anti-Semitism still takes form of exaggerated claims about the Israeli government. 14% say the Jewish state sometimes behaves as badly as Nazis. And 16% agreed with the statement that Israel's record on human rights is worse than most other countries. So we see that these are classic views. The numbers, as I said, have not spiked in the way that we've seen incidents spike, but still worrisome that Americans today still hold these very, very classic anti-Semitic views.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to address this further, if I may, later. But Professor, I'd like to go back to you for a moment. You know, we see, when we look at national narratives in Europe and so forth, we see leaders of all sorts of countries do not deny that the Holocaust occurred. They don't deny that Jews were murdered on their land, on the land of their countries. But there is they're blind or choose to be blind to the anti-Semitism in their own countries that led to these kind of events. The anti-Semitism that contributed to the atmosphere prior to the Holocaust and to the actual mass extinction up to the point of actively participating in the Jews' extinction. So what do you think, and I'd like Sharon to talk about this as well, how do you think Israel should address this, if at all? Different from what it has thus far. I think you said it correctly. Denial of the Holocaust by countries, by state leaders, it's become a minor point in the US and Europe. It exists, but it's not significant. But what you explained, that's not denial, but rather a warping of facts. They don't deny that there was a Holocaust, and they love Jews. What is loving Jews? Mostly they like dead Jews, meaning they love dead Jews. They're crazy about them. For dead Jews, they'll establish museums, and they have great, fantastic speeches. But this warping of history is based, or distortion of history is based on the fact that there's a ghost, a wraith, hovering over Europe. And this ghost is the lack of presence, the absence. The Jews are gone. They were murdered. They're gone. And despite the fact that it's clear that the murder of the Jews came from, of course, the Nazi policy, as the great Porzellan, the great poet from the Holocaust, from Chernovich, wrote, and I'm paraphrasing the poem. He said, the maestro from Germany has killed us, he said. But without the help of populations, smaller and larger populations, in all of these countries, perhaps excluding Albania, maybe, the Holocaust wouldn't have been possible. Now, because of the Poland, for example, is a perfect example. It's true that what the Germans did to the Poles was genocide, and most of the Polish people resisted the Germans. And it's true that there were about 2 million Poles that were murdered because of German policy. Absolutely true. But the fact that they were victims didn't stop the Poles from murdering Jews. Meaning the number of Jews that were either murdered by the Poles or were given by the Poles to the Nazis so that the Nazis would murder them is, according to certain estimates of various Polish historians, between 130 to 230,000. So almost 3 million Jews that lived in Poland prior to the war were killed by Germans. But this minority of a couple of percentages, 130 to 230,000, that's not a small number of murdered people that were killed directly by the Polish people. Nobody acknowledges that. And they won't acknowledge it. So how is it? I mean, what should Israel do? Israel signed with the signature of its own prime minister on a ludicrous, embarrassing agreement with Poland 2 years ago that accepts this lying narrative of the Polish people. And the person who kind of almost saved it, a couple of days ago, President Rivlin, in a speech in Poland, and he said, everything that you say is true, but, it was the but is great. President Rivlin is great with using a very strategic but. Now Israel, what should it do? Israel must defend the memory of the Holocaust. It's within us. It's of paramount importance. It's vital. It's not only in Poland or in Hungary or in Lithuania or the Ukraine or whatever. Bigger groups, smaller groups, all that are distorting history. It's also in the Western world. There are smaller groups in the West, but they're influential groups. And this is something that Israel can do. It's within our power. Israel can stand with those who speak truth. Israel has done so to an insufficient degree, and one that is open to critique thus far. It should do a better job. What do you think, Sharon? How should Israel act?
I would take a little bit of a different approach. I would say that the problem of anti-Semitism today around the world is not a Jewish problem and is not an Israel problem. It is a problem of every sovereign country to protect its own citizens. So the minute Israel takes the lead, that responsibility is almost given up by those countries, and those governments say, this is not our problem. Israel and the Jews and the ADL, that they can fix it. So I don't want to take the responsibility off the shoulder of the Polish government and the German government and the French government and say, we are holding you to task. It is your job now to protect your citizens. So how do we do that, though, to make sure the pressure is on? We have some tools now. We have what's called the IRA working definition. I just came from Berlin last night. What is really good to see is that at the German government level, both federal and state now, the IRA definition is being implemented at every part of society, from the prosecutor's office to the police commissioner. They each have special commissioners, envoys on anti-Semitism. That means every case that comes into a prosecutor's office, there is one person specifically tasked with saying, is this an anti-Semitic issue or not? We all know, especially in Germany, the title, the label of anti-Semitism is such a taboo that I was told that German judges are very hesitant. If a young person is brought in with charges, let's say, of an anti-Semitic crime, the judge says, this is such a horrible label to put on a 20-year-old young man that his whole life will be marked. I'm not going to put that label. That is the burden. That is the history. That is the trauma that the German people are dealing with today. But is it valid today? According to German law, when an anti-Semitic incident takes place, that judge has to convict and has to make sure the law is enforced. So it is up to us to ask, to advocate. That's what I do going around all the capitals of Europe and Latin America and say, where is your special envoy, specifically on anti-Semitism? Who is in your police commission looking at what's going on the streets when Jews are attacked? So we can hold those governments up to task and make sure that they're doing what their law says they're doing, they're implementing the laws that have been passed, and therefore we can make sure that their responsibility is not just given up and say the Jews in Israel can do it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to continue and really stress this question and go back to you, Professor Bauer. Let's zoom in to societies, into countries. Do you agree with the statement that as there is more corruption and turpitude within a country, more tension, more rage, it doesn't even have to do anything with the Jews. They go through this politicization by their leadership, and then anti-Semitism is simply a political tool in the hands of the strong to manipulate them. Sharon really talked about this clearly. I was part of formulating the definitions that Sharon talked about being used in Germany or not being used, but you can't fight anti-Semitism by defense, with defense. At best, more police officers will be stationed next to a synagogue, or judges will judge individuals for anti-Semitism one by one. This is aspirin. This is a band-aid approach. Look, what we need to do is use those mass communication tools in which anti-Semitism is passed off as another social problem in order to attack the anti-Semitics. It doesn't help to protect or to defend the Jews. I mean, it does help a little bit, okay? I was, I exaggerated. But you need to attack anti-Semitic people. And when the ADL does such a good job protecting Jews, they also miss the main issue. You don't need to, it's not an issue of protecting Jews. You have to attack those who are anti-Semitic and to attack them through the media, to target those and show and expose them, because that's how it should be done. These people, anti-Semitic people, are endangering their own societies by letting anti-Semitism flourish, because anti-Semitism is a cancer that eats away at a society. It eats away at that society. We can't fight it as Jews, as if as if Jewish people is the only issue here. We can push for that, but without the help of partners and allies that exist today, that we didn't have these allies and partners in the past, but without we have them now. Without their help, it won't work. And these allies sometimes are very surprising. For example, the Catholic Church, that historically was the foundation for anti-Semitism, has completely changed its policy, meaning not the whole of the church, but rather the Vatican. And most particularly the Jesuits. If 100 years ago I would appear with a statement, people would send me immediately to an insane, sanitarium, to a hospital, to a psychiatric ward. But now the Catholics have changed their tune, and people are now stand up and for their own reasons, and they're not the only ones. So I think that the entire attitude has to be one of aggression rather than defense. Thank you very much, Professor Bauer. In the few minutes that I have, I'd like to address anti-Israel attitudes and the relation of these anti-Israel attitudes to anti-Semitism. Dr. Nazarian, what do you think? Anti-Israel sentiment in the media, in technology, the dissemination of these ideas, how connected is it to anti-Semitism? Just a couple of minutes, please.
Yes, first of all, just a quick reaction to Professor Bauer. I think the point he raised about social media is tremendously important. And I want to tell you that the ADL is on the forefront of that too. We have now established 2 years ago a Center on Technology and Society sitting in the Silicon Valley. We are the first civil rights Jewish organization working with every social media platform company to come up with solutions that are using our artificial intelligence, using machine learning, and pushing them both on the legislative side and on the programmatic side. How do you take this horrible amplification of hate on their platforms off? So I agree with you, we have to do more on that, and I think it takes all of us to bring pressure, because in the US it's more challenging. We have the First Amendment. So the idea of banning speech, limiting speech is challenging, but we at the ADL take that very seriously, and we're going to keep doing that. In terms of anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism, this is, of course, what's now being called the new anti-Semitism. And probably in the US, it manifests itself more than ever on the US campuses. So we see that Jewish students in progressive spaces are being given a litmus test. If they want to enter a club that is the vegan club or is the environmentalism club, they have to check their Zionism at the door. You cannot come in and be part of our progressive social justice space if you're pro-Israel. And this is probably the most pernicious and the most dangerous issue facing Jewish students on American campuses today.
וזה ארצות הברית, ידידתה הגדולה של מדינת ישראל.
בדיוק. So there is now this test for Jewish students, and they feel alone, and they feel very divided. Because yes, they want to be progressive, yes, they want to be in the social justice causes, but they also feel what they feel for Israel. So this labeling of Israel as an oppressive power, as one that is using its power in terms of oppression of Palestinians, it is being hijacked and put on classic anti-Semitic tropes. So it is the new anti-Semitism where they use classic language, anti-Semitic language, against Israel as the Jew among the country of nations.
Thank you. Professor Bauer, תרצה להתייחס?
Professor Bauer, just one more minute before we conclude. First of all, if you intend to convince societies, or no, not societies, the big companies, to erase anti-Semitic content, again, it's going on the defensive. I am for opening hundreds of sites, and the sites not necessarily by governments, but by individuals, groups, to attack anti-Semitics. I mean, in the US, the United States has maybe, half of the United States, let's say roundly, half of the US is a country of violence. In 2015, 35,000 Americans were killed by other Americans, not by terrorists. So there's a real problem, a basic problem in America, that when you have, and when you're also a Semitic violent person, you'll do an anti-Semitic violent act. Now, if critique of Israel is anti-Semitism, then I'm an anti-Semitic person. Okay, and a lot of Israeli Jews would be anti-Semitic. Obviously, that's an anti-Semitic view, right? On the other hand, we have to say that IRA stated clearly in defense of anti-Semitism that any critique of Israel is not anti-Semitic. What is anti-Semitic? When you dismiss the right of the Jewish people to have independence in their own land. That's anti-Semitic. Dear friends, I want to give you just one more minute. We're at the beginning of a new decade. We started 2020, okay? A new decade. Where are we going? Dr. Nazarian, if I may, just 1 minute. And then Professor Bauer.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to be an optimist in the room, and lately I've been the pessimist. There are worrying signs, and just to speak specifically about the US, Something that worries us at the ADL is not only the politicization of anti-Semitism, but the weaponization of anti-Semitism, especially in American politics. We see that it's being used by political actors to point finger at the other side. And what we say is, you start with your own home, start with your own party. When there are anti-Semitic attitudes, behaviors, rhetoric in your own camp and you don't call it out and you only point finger at the other side, whether it's on a campus or at the house in the Congress, you have to start with your own home. So the worrying issue is the weaponization of anti-Semitism today in America and around the world.
Thank you. מילה אחרונה שלך.
I'm not a prophet, and I'm not a prophet's son. I can't foresee the future. And for those who say that they can, well, they don't know what they're talking about. There is a struggle between anti-liberal societies, nationalistic, extremist societies, on different levels, versus the attempt to maintain liberalism, openness, freedom of research, freedom of individuals, freedoms of groups, liberties that are given. And this struggle against anti-Semitism is part of the liberal fight against anti-liberalism. Now, if it succeeds, I don't know. I don't know whether it will or not. It's not a question of right or left. The liberal leadership in Europe is in the hands of leaders of a German conservative leader of a party, and in other places as well around Europe. We have left-wing, British left-wing that very clearly are anti-liberal and also anti-Semitic, by the way. So it's not a question of right or left, it's a question of liberalism versus anti-liberalism. And therefore that is the struggle. Israel in this matter is split, just like in everything. And if you ask me where this is going, I don't know, but I believe that we need to fight for it. Descartes said, I think before I am. But the truth is, you struggle and therefore you are. As long as I am struggling, as long as I am fighting, I am. It's not, I think before I am. You have to fight for it. Professor Bauer, Professor Nazarian, thank you both, and thank you to our audience for listening.